Look who's back for a visit. Alright, Jeepy is a 1994 XJ. And it's overheating again. The owner-operator says it's leaking fluid and the electric fan's not coming on. This Jeep has a flow cooler water pump in it, so the pressure in the coolant system is a little higher than normal. So I can imagine wherever the leak is, this is pumping water out pretty fast. Now, why is the fan not kicking on when this overheats? The indication is showing that the temperature is up over 210, and by inspection with your eyes and your nose you can see it's overheating. Water's coming out, it smells, there's smoke. Well, we're going to troubleshoot that and figure out why. Alright, the owner-operator looks like they had some fluid here to keep enough coolant in this to get it around, at least to here. And this hood release just broke off on me. Stuff like this happens with a 30-year-old Jeep. I think we can all agree that this is a requirement to get the hood open and to even begin working on this. Alright, Jeepy is a 1994 Jeep Cherokee Sport with a 4.0 engine in it. And it's overheating again. The owner-operator basically already troubleshot this for me. The owner of this Jeep's very familiar with the overheating condition of it. He's watching the gauge. He noticed there was a puddle under the engine compartment on the passenger side, and it must have got to the point where he couldn't get very far with this without putting water in it, and he nursed it down to here and dropped it off. So it's overheating, but that's because the cooling system is losing water. So that's what we need to figure out, where the water's going. Man, when somebody gives you that much detail, you can almost troubleshoot it before you open the hood. So what do we know about this? It's overheating because there's no water in it. That means it's either a leak or the water is going through the head gasket into the exhaust passage and going out the exhaust. Or it could be going into the oil. We'll check that just to review. If it's on the passenger side, most likely that heater control valve has developed a leak, it's cracked, or the hoses going to it are damaged. If the heater core was leaking, first of all, most likely there'd be a smell associated with that. You'd also probably have a wet area on the passenger side there on the floor. And one more valuable piece of information that the owner-operator provided is that when he refilled the coolant system with water, the heater no longer worked. Well, that means during the overheat, the thermostat fully open and stayed in the open position. Another interesting thing he said was the electric fan never kicked off. Well, that also is most likely an indication that there was no water to cause that temp sensor to activate the fan. But we'll look at that also. All right, now that we can get this hood open, let's start troubleshooting. Okay, real quick about hood release cables. They're not hard to change. This is a place where you want to make sure you got lubricant. See that? Usually when they break, this is seized up on you. Spring assisted back. So I recommend keep this nice and lubed up. This thing ever breaks on you in here, like at this, getting this hood open is going to be a challenge. Okay, let's move on to our overheating. All right, the thermostat is under this housing right here. And if the water leak was on the passenger side under the engine, most likely it's this heater control valve. I see a little bit of indication of water coming through right here. That's where the vacuum pressure operates this. But it's inconclusive, isn't it? We're going to have to change the thermostat, warm this thing up, and reevaluate this. Nothing's easy. Well, there's no water in there, is there? Well, this clamp must have been secured down before this fan got put on. Or maybe I tightened it down with a number 8mm wrench, but I doubt it. I'm lazy. Okay, no water in there either. And there's our sending unit, which will turn the fan on. These bolts are 1/2 inch, And they've been on and off here so many times. Starting to worry about these threads failing on me. Okay, the one at the bottom is kind of under the belt. Our goal here is to change this thermostat out and operate it again. So I'm going to try to do this with the belt still installed by just pushing it down. And there's our thermostat. And you can see that it is indeed stuck open. I was taught you could reset these, but I no longer feel that's possible on this particular one. And we're not even going to try it. This flow cooler water pump operates at a higher pressure, causes more fluid flow through the engine, and I gotta admit that does look pretty clean in there, doesn't it? Let's take a look at the radiator cap. That's pretty nasty, but there's not much flow up here anyway, so we'll keep looking at stuff. Now that we've looked in the engine compartment and there's nothing obvious where the water's going, this has got me thinking about it all day long, and I'm starting to worry about the head gasket on this. There's one other place it could go, the freeze plug. There's some freeze plugs on the side of the block, and like this one, see how it corroded right here? So that would be an easy fix if we can access it. But we have to be able to swing a hammer to get this seated again. But we'll find out soon enough when this is filled with water and we heat it up. All right, the thermostat. This is the little temp sensor that as it heats up, it pushes out. So this side goes toward the block. Gasket, new thermostat was 19 bucks, so this has a little different feature in here. Interesting. So there's another indication besides seeing light through it. That temp sensor is not in the recess anymore. It's extended all the way, and then these tongs here have snapped out and locked it open. Alright, this is the sealant for your cooling system. Don't use this on this application. This thing comes on and off at least once a year when you got an old car. And this new feature of the sticker on here, it's actually really helpful. And cleans up pretty easy too. Look at this. That makes me very happy. Wow. All right, while we got this apart, let's take a look at this temp sensor right here. It sits in the water jacket. It's basically just a little switch that when it senses that the temperature of the water is too hot, it opens up. And when it opens up, the fan comes on. So that makes troubleshooting this fan easy. You just unhook this and it should come on. Now doing that's going to bring the engine light on, but when you hook it back up and running, it's going to reset itself after a little while. So by disconnecting this connector, you can test this and the fan real quick. Alright, there's the temp bulb side of the thermostat, and that's going to go toward the block. I'm using a little bit of petroleum jelly as a mastic to make it stick there. Mastic's a plant resin, but that term's used in tile. I think it's a good term to use for that. Alright, one more thing before we put this cover back on here. When you got an overheat problem on this engine and you can't figure it out, you're led to believe that you need to burp this engine. And some people drill a little hole right here in that thermostat, and that in theory is going to equalize the air pressure somehow. But we'll cover burping this engine also when this is all done. But I will say this, I rebuilt this engine, stuck it in here, thought I had enough water in it, and went riding around the block all Mr. Happy. And this thing overheated and seized up on me. Thank goodness I wasn't going too fast. But that's because I didn't let enough water get into the block. All right, we're going to make sure we got enough anti-seize in here in this void area. So what I'm talking about, the void area, is where the bolt head is and where it enters the block. You get a water leak into this void area and this corrodes. It's very difficult to get apart again. So that's why I'm using this anti-seize in here. Not so much on the threads, although that's important also, but I'm concerned about, from past experience, having this void area just filled with a substance, and then you can't get the bolt out and the bolt head snaps off. Anyway, that's my thinking on that. And the sticker on this gasket sure is a nice feature, I'm telling you. Okay, I'm pushing this belt down with my hand and I'm threading the bottom one. And I'm taking my time here. I'm going to get as much thread on this as possible before I release this belt, because that belt's going to hit the bolt head. But we haven't even done anything yet to figure out why this is overheating. We don't want to pull this serpentine belt off. We got to loosen the power steering pump to do that. Okay. These are threaded. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch just to get them snug. And then I'm going to go down to one size in socket so I don't strip this out. I stripped out plenty of gooseneck bolt threads before. Having one stripped out and then you tighten it as best you can with the other one and just hope for the best. Alright, I'm bumping down a size from 1/2 inch to 3/4 because I don't want to strip these bolts out. They're 15 foot-pounds. That's not a lot. By using this 1/2 inch to start with, I can work around this belt. See that? Try to work around the belt with this. This is going to keep popping off on you unless you got a deep well, which I've lost mine. So 15 foot-pounds is not a lot. Do not strip this out. If you got a torque wrench, great. Even better, I got a 1/4 inch 1/2 inch socket. So you see what I'm saying? We got to push the belt down to get at that bolt. Don't over torque these. Alright, as your gasket crushes down, the torque's gonna change. So if you got your torque wrench out and you went to 15, probably in a day, that 15 is going to be less than that because your gasket with heat crushed down. So I suggest going back and checking it again if you have a leak. I'm going to just use my calibrated torque wrench right here and snug that thing down. Alright, we've done all this work and we haven't figured out where the water's going yet. So back to my story on the new engine. I didn't have enough water in this when I went driving around with the new engine installation. I had filled up the radiator, let it sit a while, but essentially the block, when that thermostat opened, took all that water in there and it just wasn't enough to cool it. And the temperature was coming up and I was away from the house. And I had slowed down to go around a corner and this thing just seized up on me. Where I'm going with this is, with this running around with no water, I'm starting to think the head gasket is probably causing this, because I don't see any indication of water leaking anywhere over here. And then when people are trying to figure out why their engine's overheating, they start looking at stuff like air trapped in this block. And that's why they drill that hole in that thermostat. They think they're not getting water into all the passages in the block. And one thing to really consider at that point, in your desperation, if your engine's so worn out that you have blow-by on the piston rings and it's going into the crankcase, that's causing an overheat. And we're going to look at that too on this engine, because now that I'm thinking about it, this engine is the rebuild's 9 years ago, so this is a worn out engine again. Alright, let's get this back together. Let's test it. Alright, a good way to crack your block is to put cold water in an overheated engine. So we're going to start this up. And monitor the level of this. Once it's hot, we're not going to put water in this unless it's running. And that radiator's empty again. Where the hell is this water going? Is it some sort of magic? Alright, if the water's coming out over here, and that's because that's where the puddle was located, we were given that information. And this won't even drive 10 miles without overheating, and the water's going somewhere. We should be able to see it right here when we start this. Alright, a new day. I didn't want the police out here last night if I started yelling. Let's get some stuff done before it starts raining like hell. And I've been thinking about this all night. If the head gasket failed, how much work this is going to be. So the thermostat housing bolts into the front of the head right there. The intake and exhaust manifold are over here, and they fit together snugly like a piece of puzzle piece. Over here is pretty clean. And then if you were to strip these bolts when you brought your head in, they'd probably put a helicoil in there for you. That's not too bad. The ones I've screwed up are usually in intake manifolds. So back here, that's your sending unit to the temp control gauge, and that's where you're supposed to burp it from back there. The theory is air's getting trapped in the head and the water can't get in there, but as you can see, that's a difficult area to get to, so I'm going to show you a different way to burp it. Then the last time this head went out, the breach was between the combustion chamber and the water jacket. So in that scenario, we weren't losing water. So that's not the breach in this discrepancy. This would be going out the exhaust or in the oil. Okay, the other thing I was thinking about last night was when this head was rebuilt and reinstalled, the bottom end went out shortly thereafter. And I took this to the same machinist, and he said with the 4.0, that's typical. You redo the head, and next thing you know, the bottom end goes out. But anyway, with the new head installed, this started overheating again. And what it was blow bypass the piston rings into the crank case was causing the overheat. I mean, that's basically, you know, exhaust gas building up in the crankcase. So that's when I rebuilt the engine. And on that first test, I put water in the radiator and let it sit here. And then you can tell when the thermostat opens, and I put more water in here and then took off on a test drive. And I was right here in the neighborhood, and luckily when this seized up, it just basically stalled out the engine and came to a stop. When it cooled down, I was able to get it started again, thank goodness. That would have been a $1,500 waste, and got it home. So there is an issue with this engine of getting water into the block, and you know, when the water's in there, that means the air has to go somewhere. So all right, that's enough talking. Let's test this out. All right, right off the bat, let's see if it's in the oil. No, you're not leaking coolant through the head gasket into our lubrication system. That's a good thing, but that oil certainly needs change, doesn't it? All right, if it's leaking water as bad as we were told by the owner, we should be able to see this right here. thin. Let's let this thing warm up. Alright, if your bottom end is so worn out with the byproduct of combustion is going into the crankcase, you're going to see it right here. There'll be a big smoke billowing out of there. Smoke ring. Nothing. That's a good sign. Don't forget about overheating caused by a worn out engine. You're going to change parts, and at the end of the day, the piston and cylinder walls are just so worn out. The hot gases are building up in the crankcase, and that's your overheat. But you're also going to have oil blowing all over the place, and you're going to know. I mean, if you've had the vehicle that long, it's just worn out. Here's my setup for burping and checking the head gasket. Alright, there's air escaping. So there it looks like the thermostat just opened and took the water in. Alright, when this cold water hits that, it's going to close up again. And there's more air coming out. If the head gasket had a breach between the combustion chamber and the water jackets, you'd be seeing and smelling stuff right here. Alright, it took all that water again. Okay, there we go. Something's going on back there. I don't know what's going on back there, but there's where the water's going. see that smoke coming out back there? You can smell it too. I can imagine when this is fully up to operating temperature and you're out on the freeway, this thing empties quick. So the head has a freeze plug at the very end back there. And that's most likely where this water's coming from. I mean, it doesn't look like it's at the split line, does it? Because it's clearly around the split lines down here. And I mean, what else could it be? A crack in the head? No. There's clearly, that's where the freeze plug is, on the head. Yuck. All right. I don't know if you'll be able to see that or not, but there's the freeze plug and there's where the water's coming out. All right, that is Jeep 4.0 overheating troubleshooting. I've just imparted my vast storehouse of knowledge onto you, and I gotta admit, this is a new one for even me. Okay, let's review what happened here. Jeepy was overheating. The owner told us that it was losing water in the approximate area where the water was coming from, and we troubleshot it to the freeze plug at the back end of the head is corroded and leaking water. The reason the fan wasn't coming on, there was no water there to activate that switch. And then the overheat was just the symptom of no water in the cooling system. All right, my last question was, is it going to be easier to just bump this engine out a little bit and get in there? But I've decided I'm just going to pull the head off real quick and pop in a new freeze plug. All right, that's it.